All right, everybody. We are here today. I'm excited. I am excited today as we are going to be talking Japanese whiskey. I have with me the Global Advocacy Manager for the House of Suntory, James Bowker. That is an amazing title, and I cannot wait to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jesse. It's a pleasure to be here, man. And time to invade the world of bourbon with a little bit of Japanese magic.
That's exactly right. That is the game plan for today. And I asked around, I said, who do I need to talk to? And everybody said, you need to talk to James. James is the man when it comes to the House of Suntory. And I am excited to talk to you about all things Japanese whiskey today.
Thank you very much, man. Well, tell me what's on your mind. What can I engage you with today?
Well, the game plan here is take a bourbon lover on a journey to Japanese whiskey land. So I think let's start with just maybe to anybody that doesn't know a brief history of the House of Suntory and maybe the whiskeys we're going to be discussing today, if you don't mind. Just get us started with some organic origin stories.
Easy. It's a beautiful story first and foremost, and it's one of my favorite transitions is bringing someone from bourbon to Japanese whiskey. Insofar as they're kind of speaking to the same person in terms of they provide a sense of brightness and warmth without that kind of intense smokiness that sometimes people associate with Scotch and single malt whiskeys. But they're also vastly different because so many of the American whiskeys are hyper intense in terms of their ABV and their spice profile, whereas Japanese is all about that lightness and that delicacy. So it's kind of an interesting Jekyll and Hyde journey we're going to go on today. But as you say, I'll start you off with a bit of the history. So it's a fascinating century or so that's passed in the world of Japanese whiskey. I've been lucky to be in the world of Japanese whiskey about 15 years now. So really just this tiny sliver of the overall timeline that we're talking about today. But it begins way before Japanese whiskey was ever invented. It begins really back in kind of ancient Japanese food and drinks culture and how people enjoyed alcohol. And most of the time, people were drinking sake. So this is often known as a rice wine. It's actually closer to a beer, but it's a very clean, very gentle flavor profile. And of course, when they weren't drinking alcohol, perhaps it was things like green tea, sencha, matcha, and so on. Now, they did have spirits in Japan, but they were quite unusual. They were rice-based spirits generally. Sometimes people might have heard of something called shochu, but there was also lots of other types, things like awamori, for example. And most interestingly, the spirits were generally drunk mixed with water. So they were very rarely drunk as a kind of neat spirit, but rather cut with spring water to create kind of a long, more refreshing style of drink. And if you think, the weather we're facing right now in the United States, I'm here in New York, and I know you're down south. It's fairly hot. It's fairly humid right now. Japan has that every single year for months on end. The summer season is super humid and super warm. We're talking over 100 degrees for months. And so that brightness and that lightness of that refreshing style of drinking was key to the history of Japanese whiskey. And that will come clear as we talk a bit about the spirits we're going to taste today. So that's the kind of early days context. And then there was this amazing period in Japanese history called the Edo period. So have you ever watched the series Shogun?
Yes, I
Right?
absolutely hooked on it, actually.
Amazing TV show, so amazing that we've ended up partnering with Anna Sawai. I'm sure you know she's
Oh,
the
that is
lead role in that show. She's now
badass.
our global ambassador. So for me, managing our ambassadors, getting to work with her is like the most amazing experience. Yeah, trust me, a dream come true for me professionally. But this show was kind of set during a period known as the Edo period, where Japan was isolating itself from the rest of the world because it had horrible civil wars for centuries. And then finally, when Japan was unified, the shogun, the leader of the country, the leader of the kind of military in Japan, decided to close the borders because they figured that a lot of the problems going on in the country were coming from outside. People were coming along trying to stimulate the power struggles between different dynasties and so on. But if we close the borders, we remove ourselves from that kind of destabilizing outside influence. And so for 250 years, you weren't allowed to enter or leave Japan on pain of death, which was a really fascinating time in their history because it meant that the indigenous culture flourished. So
Right.
uniquely Japanese forms of artistry and craftsmanship developed in a way they never had before because that was the only thing you could do. That was the only thing you could buy. That was the only place to find inspiration. And so we see things like the development of poetry. We see the development of traditional arts, things like, painting, weaving, etc., all the way through to countless different types of craftsmanship that is distinctly and uniquely Japanese versus Korean inspired, Chinese inspired, and so on. And so when this is all going on, Japan is really discovering a real sense of self, what it is, what it stands for, who we believe ourselves to be. And all of this is best captured by a word that's called wa, W-A. Wa is actually the original name of Japan. So before it was called Nihon, Nippon, Japan, anything else, it was known as wa, which means harmony. And it's this idea of what is the core philosophy or concept that unites the culture. And unlike many of the Western countries, this is not a culture that's grown up around Christianity or any of those traditional Abrahamic ways of seeing the world. This is a culture that's grown up around Shintoism and Buddhism. And they both look to nature for inspiration. The beauty of nature and the most perfect example of that beauty is the way in which everything works together in harmony. And so wa, this idea of harmony between nature, between culture, between peoples, becomes the centerpiece of Japanese artistry and crafts. So that's our kind of early doors context before whiskey comes onto the scene. So far, are you enjoying? You feeling good?
I just want to more is basically all I'm thinking right now, because as you're saying that, so many things fall into place in terms of like, of course, you have a pronounced personality to a culture if they had the time to like really look inward and just let what happens happen organically without any outside interference. That's just such a, I didn't know that. I don't know much about this. I'm enticed.
It's honestly one of the most amazing bits of history that I can't think of almost any other country that has fully closed itself off for 250 years. It's an amazing thought about how that influences like a cultural identity. Now, obviously, this had a huge amount of advantage for Japan, but it also came with its challenges because, of course, when you're not interacting with the rest of the world, you miss out on what's happening
Right.
in all these other places. And of course, this was I say, of course, I haven't said this yet, but it kind of began around the 1700s and ran through until the mid 19th century. So about 250 years in total for the Edo period. And then, of course, that timeline coincides with many of the most important moments within spirits history, because of course we have the Industrial Revolution and we have the invention of most of the technologies that allow us to make modern spirits. So when we think about when was whiskey invented, when was gin, when was vodka invented, they were generally all invented around the same time, not because no one had ever thought of these things before, but because there were new technologies. There were new types of pot still, new types of column still, condensers, etc., that allowed us to make spirits the way we now make them. And so what this meant is the Edo period prevented Japan from experiencing the modern spirits renaissance that happened all around the rest of the world. And so what we can conclude from this is no surprises. When those borders finally open, people get very, very excited to try this foreign spirit.
So once the walls came down, once the doors opened, was there a hesitation to, like, the people, of course, you give someone something they've never had before, they're going to go gaga for it. Was there like, did they try to roll it out slowly? Were they like, all right, we're going to crack the door open, everybody just kind of, let's all calm down a little bit? Or was it just like, yeah, we're doing this all in, let's go?
I think at that point, it fairly quickly escalated. It was a kind of a snowball effect. And what was fascinating was that whiskey was at the very much at the heart of that door being cracked open in the first place. So the American history books tell it there was this lovely, peaceful moment where Commodore Matthew Perry sails up and befriends the Japanese, and they open the borders. Of course, the Japanese stories tell a very different narrative, wherein maybe there's a whole fleet of American ships full of soldiers, and it's a slightly scary proposition for the Japanese who haven't had the Industrial Revolution. But regardless of how we understand the story, what we do know that happened was that in those negotiations around peace and opening the borders was a huge amount of social interaction. This is diplomacy, and diplomacy very often happens with a drink in hand.
1,000%.
So Perry had brought with him a whole host of international wonderful products to kind of show the Japanese this is what you would benefit from if you begin to trade with us. And a key part of that was spirits, and in particular whiskey.
Could you just imagine that for a second? Just imagine that you've been cut off from the world for 250 years, and now all of a sudden you've got like a buffet of spirits in front of you. Just from a mind-blowing perspective, that is out of this world.
This is exactly it. And of course, the rumor spreads like wildfire. So around the country, you have people going like, "Oh my goodness, we've heard about these amazing dinners that were hosted between the Japanese elite and these kind of foreign new powers, and they were sharing this new type of alcohol, and they, there was these huge parties and huge celebrations, and people had a great time, and it apparently tasted amazing." And so you have this kind of early doors context where Japan has not had foreign spirits for so long. Suddenly these doors open, and we're very lucky that the founder of the House of Suntory, Shinjiro Tori, he around that time was working as a very young man for a pharmaceutical company. And the pharmaceutical companies in those days, just as is the case here in America and where I'm from back in Europe, the pharmaceutical companies were the ones selling spirits back in the day, right?
Of
They were
course, of
often understood
course.
as a medical thing as much as they were anything else.
Right?
And so he becomes one of the very first people in Japanese history responsible for becoming an expert in foreign style liquor and then sharing it with the rest of Japan.
Which just, even with cultural differences, the parallels between uh how it took off, like they're right on par with how everybody else around that time was. Like, he was, of course he was a pharmacist, or of course he worked at a pharmacy. Like,
Right.
it all lines up. Like, no matter where you are, it's still going to, the human side of it's going to happen the same way.
Exactly. And so he's basically being one of the very first people to have access to the highest quality spirits entering the country. And unsurprisingly, there was also a bunch of fake stuff being made and really low quality spirits being brought in through piracy and so on. But he was lucky. He was working for one of these big pharmaceutical organizations. He had first access, first choice to the finest spirits coming into Japan. And unsurprisingly, just fell in love. Tasted things like Scottish whiskey, French brandies, cognacs, Spanish wines, and just discovered this personal passion for these new flavors. And he actually gained a reputation. His nickname was the nose of Osaka, perhaps because he had a large nose, but probably more importantly because he had such a good palate for
Right, right.
tasting and for describing the Western style spirits. And this just immediately lights this kind of fire of passion inside him. And so quite quickly, he departs the pharmaceutical company and starts his own business, which is just a store. It's not a whiskey company at this stage. It's literally a shop specializing in selling the thing that he loves. But one really important thing is that not only had he discovered foreign spirits for the first time when he worked in this pharmaceutical company, he'd also learned the basics of chemistry and the basics of blending. Because again, back then you would have been blending different herbal infusions to create medicinal pharmaceutical products. So you'd have said, like, well, these herbs benefit these things and these other spices benefit these other things. We bring them together, we make something that's tasty because we need people to actually drink this so that the medicine has an effect, but also that has that benefit from a chemical perspective. So he's got these kind of background skills as well as his passion and his palate. So he opens the store and he starts selling Western style spirits. And at this stage, we're going to jump into nosing our first whiskey because
Yes.
one thing, we shouldn't go too long without a glass in our hands. But for
A
another
thousand
reason,
percent.
it captures the point, I think, quite well. So we've both got some Suntory Toki in our glass. So I think the audience can probably see it in the background for you there. I'll show my bottle as well.
Yeah.
This is our kind of most accessible whiskey. Japanese whiskey is generally speaking made to an incredibly high quality, and of course, it is shipped all the way from Japan, so it's going to be a little bit of a more premium price point compared to, say, Jim Beam, which is another beautiful brand that we work with here at the House of Suntory. But Toki, nonetheless, it's a great accessible price point, around $40 or so, depending on, of course, where you are and the availability locally. But
And when people find this for the first time, this is probably the one that, if you've you know how everybody finds new spirits sometimes through cocktails or through cocktail culture, your favorite highball has probably been made with Toki. Like, if you enjoy a nice bowl of ramen and you want to pair it perfectly with something, a Toki highball is always on my right next to my bowl as I'm getting ready to engage.
absolutely. And I mentioned before how they would lengthen spirits with water in Japan, so awamoris and shochis, etc. As whiskey was first released, they continued to do that with whiskey. It became known as the mizawari, or whiskey with water. And as carbonation technology improved, people discovered they had a even greater love for whiskey with carbonated water, which became the highball. And
Oh,
it's similar to whiskey soda. The ratio is a little bit different, but most importantly, it's about keeping maximum carbonation, so you get this really crisp kind of the tingle from the
yeah.
fizz, and it gives almost like a champagne effervescence.
Perfect. I mean, 1,000%. Less sugar, more bubble. That's 100% why I like it.
Right. Exactly. So as you nose this whiskey, Jesse, obviously you've tasted Toki before, but casting aside any kind of preconceived notions, just on the nose and on the palate, how does this aroma differ from the aromas of blended Scotch whiskies you may have tasted before? Because this
I
is a
think
blended whiskey.
it's more berry forward. You're getting that lighter touch. You're getting those herbal notes, and then you're getting like a slight note of berry coming right out of the glass at you. It's delicate, I would say, in terms of just the finesse that you're getting off the nose.
Exactly. This is exactly correct. This is the thing. So many people get nervous about sharing their opinion about whiskeys and just speaking from the heart. You're obviously a bit of an expert yourself, but I'd encourage anyone watching or listening to this to trust themselves because you're dead on. Lightness, delicacy, and kind of refinement are the key things to understanding Japanese whiskey. Go on, sorry, what were you saying?
No. I my favorite part about nosing is like as it opens up, you and we open these, or I opened mine before we got started, and you get a like even from nosing it from the beginning till now, like it's berry and orchard, like it's like now going back and forth between the sugar of a plum and the smell, like the like a Lord, what am I thinking? Springtime orchard.
Mm.
Uh, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that,
there's
that,
like young leaves coming out on the apple tree. Yeah.
that yes, 1,000%. Yes, nailed it.
So the reason I like to do this at this stage is because when you get an understanding of the flavor cultural differences, it helps you understand spirits categories. So if I were to ask you, what's the first food you think of when you think of America, USA, what would you say?
Cheeseburgers.
Cheeseburgers, right? Totally agree. What about if I say Scotland or Britain?
Oh Lord, fish and chips. For for Scotland, I always go Scotch eggs.
Scotch eggs, exactly. But yeah, fish and chips, roast dinners, haggis, those sorts of things, right?
Right, right.
What about Japan? What do you think of when you think of Japan?
Fresh fish. I always think sushi. You think those light, almost. I think sushi. 1,000%.
100%. And I've asked this question now of like probably over 5,000 people, and those are the three answers that we always get. We always get hamburgers, cheeseburgers, we always get sushi, and everyone always gets a bit confused because they can't remember what Scottish people eat. But generally speaking, it's a haggis, roast dinners, fish and chips. And this is key to understanding Japanese whiskey as a category. And we're really proud of the House of Suntory to try and represent the overarching category of Japanese whiskey as the largest producer by quite some margin and the first producer of Japanese whiskey. So I'm speaking now generally to the category. What's fascinating is craftsmanship is subjective, right? There's an element of artistry in craftsmanship. So when I talk to our master blender, like, how do you define what it is to be an artisan in what you do? He says it's kind of like a Venn diagram. So two overlapping circles. On one side, you've got science and technology. On the other side, you've got kind of subjective artistic taste. What do you look for? What do you want as the creator? And of course, what they want is something good, something great, something perfect if they can. But the weird thing is that changes depending on your definition of good, great, or perfect.
That's right.
So if
That's
I've
right.
grown up eating hamburgers, I'm used to a culture of bright, intense, nice kind of contrasting between sweet, sour, spice profiles, but that kind of fairly hardcore, intense flavor profile is what we associate with the cuisine here in the United States, especially with high sugars and high salts. You then go over to Scotland, a culture that's much colder and much more dismal in terms of its weather. The food and drinks we drink in Britain tend to be very heartwarming, very rich, quite indulgent to kind of satisfy that inner craving for comfort that we don't get from our outside surroundings. And then you go to Japan, right? Again, in summer, incredibly hot, incredibly humid. The food culture there is all about fresh flavors, seasonality, lightness, importantly, and delicacy, importantly. And that goes beyond just the sushi. If I think about what I'm going to sit down and drink with my meal, generally speaking, it's a glass of red wine. Where traditionally in Japan it would be sake. If you've tried sake and red wine, you can straight away start to see the difference in the flavors that people enjoy. In the morning, I have a double espresso. In Japan, we might drink green tea. So all across the board, we can see that the Japanese flavor philosophy is about that light, delicate, soft, and subtle flavor profile compared to perhaps the United States or Scotland. And so that's really the first key to understanding Japanese whiskey is you need to make it for the Japanese palate.
Well, I think that's what entices external palates towards Japanese flavors is because it is so out of our cultural index. Like we're out of our depths. What do you mean you don't just shove it all in at one time and put like as much salt and bacon on it as possible? You actually tiny bites and take your time with it. Like it's heightened from elegance standpoint because it's so foreign to it. Like, oh, it must be good. Look how tiny it is. Look how delicate and dainty. This must be upscale. It's just we're preconditioned for that based off of the number of cheeseburgers.
Right. And that's exactly, and this was the immediate insight that came about when Shinjiro Tori opened this store selling Western style spirits because people wanted to try them. They were wildly excited. They flooded to it. He's from Osaka. So they come to Osaka, they buy these spirits, but oddly, they don't come back and buy another bottle of wine or another bottle of spirits. And based on our conversation we've just had, what can you guess why that might have been?
Because it was lasting them forever.
Yeah, it was way too intense, right? It was the take a sip of something like, let's say, Lafroig and be like, oh my God, my palate does not know how to handle that.
I'll see it next year when it gets cold again.
Right. And so what had to happen was a blending process because for Shinjiro Tori, he's now sitting on this an amazing selection of great quality wines and spirits, but they're not selling because the flavor's too intense for the Japanese palate. And so he goes back to his expertise as a blender from his previous life and starts blending different wines to try and create a product that Japanese people would like. And the very first product that was successful was like 8 years later. It's called Akadama Port Wine. And it was using sherries and other Spanish wines to create a kind of sweet digestif after dinner drink. And so puts that on the market. Huge success. People absolutely love it. And this crystallizes what he wants, which is to create spirits specifically tailored to the Japanese palate, but inspired by his passion of Western style distillation. And so 1923, he's raised enough money, he's managed to sell enough of that wonderful first product to open Japan's first whiskey distillery, which is Yamazaki. And we're going to taste Yamazaki a little bit later, but to finish that history for you, you then have roughly 100 years now, 103 years we've been making whiskey, where they've gradually been applying this approach called Kaizen. So learning from the masters, learning the Scottish traditions, mastering that. But once you've mastered the Scottish production style, gradually making little uniquely Japanese tweaks to that production to improve the quality of your whiskey.
Okay, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today. After they master the Scottish style, what were the tweaks? Because we've already identified that there's a gigantic difference in temperature from where the Scottish are putting their barrels and where the Japanese are putting their barrels. So when you're dealing with that difference, you've got that heat versus that cold. What are some of the ways they're tempering that whiskey to master it to the Japanese palate?
Yeah, really good question. So we have this joke internally for our brand ambassadors and whiskey experts. We say turtles all the way down because they give you an answer and it's kind of a simple version. And then you ask a bit more and there's a layer below that and a layer below that. So we'll start with the simple and we can go as deep as we fancy over the
Yes,
course
please.
of this talk. So for the very kind of outset, there was this idea of we have to make something that is as authentic as possible. So Shinjiro Tori, there's an amazing quote from about a century ago where he says, I want to make truly Japanese whiskey that would one day surpass the quality of Western spirits. And what he meant by that was, of course, it had to be a made in Japan. Like truly Japanese has to be made in Japan. It has to also be made by Japanese people with Japanese sensibilities and artistic kind of inspiration. And importantly, most importantly, it has to be made for Japanese people. So of Japan, by Japan, for Japan is one way I like to express this. And what that's evolved into is what we call our three pillars of Suntory, or the three philosophies that guide how do we protect our authenticity. The first is wa, and that's that word I mentioned earlier, harmony with Japanese nature. How can we get a sense of place, a sense of terroir, a real sense of this is truly Japanese because it tastes of the nature, it tastes of the culture. And so with our single malts like Yamazaki just outside Kyoto or Hakushu up in the mountains, there's a real effort to capture something of the natural flavors of that space. Yamazaki has a lot of warm kind of semi-tropical fruit profiles as well as some lovely incense notes. So Mizunara provides lovely sandalwood and cedarwood profiles which are reminiscent of the incredible temples you find around that region. Hakushu, on the other hand, up in the mountains, gets lots of kind of green fruit flavors. It's buried inside this beautiful nature reserve owned by Suntory. Up in the mountains, an incredible, luscious green valley. And so you get those green fruit flavors expressing the natural terroir of the distillery. So we start with what? Capturing a sense of the nature. Then you have this idea, the second pillar of monozukuri, which just means craftsmanship in Japanese. And we'll delve into what's different, but really about in Japanese craftsmanship, it's about mastering every single step of the process. So breaking it all apart. What raw ingredients to begin with? How do we then process those? How do we ferment it? How do we distill it? How do we mature it? But then how can we zoom even further and then go, well, actually, there's different ways to ferment things. There's different ways to distill things. And why don't we do all of them? And then find out which works best for the blending. And then the final pillar is omotenashi, which is that idea of hospitality in Japanese culture. And this is again, for the Japanese culture. So we have of the culture, as in from the terroir, by the culture, by the people of Japan, made in crafted in the Japanese way, and then for Japan, omotenashi, giving that sense of giving something, a gift back to the culture. And this is where the art of blending comes in. So even our single malt whiskies are blended from a huge variety of different types of cask, different types of distillation, and different types of everything from every step, fermentation all the way through to bottling. So that's really the heart of what makes Japanese whiskey and Suntory different, is they're making a huge variety of different styles in each distillery, such as to give our blenders the ultimate expression. And I use the metaphor of painting, right? If I have a single blue paint, I can paint a canvas blue, but it's gonna be a very boring canvas. Whereas if I have a huge variety of different hues, different colors, different shades, my painting has the opportunity to be much more interesting, much more complex. Now, I'm a terrible painter, so that would never happen. But that's the Japanese approach to how we make and blend our whiskeys.
I love the parallels that I'm hearing too between the way the Japanese were going about creating their whiskeys and the way you've heard every great master distiller of the whiskey, the American whiskey space, come up the ranks and create some of the goodness that we have on the bourbon side, breaking it down, figuring out how it works, why it works, and then optimizing it for what you want it to be. It's what I love about spirits is we all put our own spin, but there's no way to skip process when it comes to making proper spirits good, great, better. So this is absolutely awesome so far.
Thank you, man. And so if we think about the way that the actual production of Japanese whiskey, because I know that's something that you and your audience are really keen on, it's closest to Scottish style whiskey. So
Okay.
in Japanese craftsmanship, generally speaking, you first look to who you believe to be a master. You go and do an apprenticeship, you learn from that master, and then once you've mastered their stuff, that's when you're kind of allowed to go and do your own thing and make your own tweaks.
Like a painter you were noting a moment ago, for a classic painting, you apprenticed, you learned that technique. Picasso, nobody, not everyone knows that before he was able to go abstract, he had to perfect realism. Like it's, I love it, love it.
It's exactly that, right? And we've all seen like the amazing documentaries about sushi, right? You go and learn for 10 years before you're even allowed to cut a fish. Amazing stuff. And so the Scottish were considered to be the best at whiskey making 100 or so years ago. And so Shinjiro Tori and Suntory looked to the Scottish first for inspiration. So they hired a young Japanese guy who'd spent a couple of months in Scotland. He'd done a few apprenticeships. He was the only Japanese person who'd ever worked in a distillery in Scotland. They employed him. He'd been an old, not quite an apprentice, but a mentee, I suppose, for many years at this stage of Shinjiro Tori. So he comes on board. They collaborate to design the Yamazaki distillery. They open that in 1923. They start making whiskey. Now, unfortunately, the two guys had quite a different vision for what they wanted from their whiskey. So Shinjiro Tori wanted a unique style defined by Japan, right? Defined by that delicate palate. But his young apprentice, who was supporting the distillation, he had fallen in love with the heavy Scottish style of whiskey making. So the first few whiskeys produced were heavy, smoky, full-bodied whiskeys, and they nearly bankrupted the company because they weren't meeting this brief of what Tori-san knew he needed. And so at that stage, they kind of fell out a little bit, these two guys. He gets demoted and sent to work in beer brewing because we already had a brewery at that stage, and eventually leaves the company. And he goes on to found Nika. So there's the two major companies in Suntory, and we're now all very good friends. Thankfully, all of that drama is long, long behind us. But the key thing to understand is that The philosophical difference is that Suntory is making Japanese whiskey that is defined by the palate and nature of Japan. So it's much lighter. We have this philosophy of doing subtle and refined yet complex. Now, Nika, I used to work for Nika and I love their wonderful company, wonderful products. They make Scottish styled whiskey in the north of Japan. So their whiskeys are a bit more full bodied compared to Suntory's. So at that stage, the two guys have gone their separate ways. Shinjiro Tori and his son also decide to travel to Scotland, master the Scottish way of doing things. They start blending their whiskies a bit more. And in 1937, they finally released their first kind of successful whiskey, Kakabin. And then over the decades, they continue to refine the quality by making these tweaks to distillation. And this is where we get into the detail of how it's different. So Scottish whiskey, you start with malted barley. You ferment that normally for 2 to 3 days. At that stage, you have something called a wash, which is similar to a beer, often around 7% alcohol by volume. You distill that twice in pot stills. This is a batch distillation process. Your first distillation is called your wash still. That gets you to maybe 25% ABV. You distill that a second time in a smaller still called a spirit still. That takes you to, say, 60 or 70 ABV. That then gets slightly watered down, put into a barrel, and then matured for at least 3 years before bottling. And that's the Scottish way.
I love no matter how many times I hear that, it makes me thirsty every time I hear it. Like you're sitting there, yeah.
Yeah, give me some of that. Like, I mean, and by the way, cheers. We can might as well have a glass and enjoy. Yeah,
for sure. Cheers. Very nice to meet you.
So to delve then a little bit into how that basic process was evolved over the last century at Yamazaki, we began to ask ourselves, how can we improve this if we don't fully understand every variable, right? Because what's fascinating is that in Scotland, many of the great recipes from our most beloved whiskey brands, whether that's Laphroaig, Bowmore, Macallan, Auchentoshan, and whatever it might be, those recipes were often kind of stumbled across by accident. They didn't have the advanced chemical understanding that we're now privileged to have. It was just a case of, we know roughly how fermentation distillation works. Let's try a bunch of recipes until one tastes great.
Right.
Once we found that one, we don't know what we need to change to improve it. So we're not going to change it. We're going to keep this recipe, keep making it this way, because that's how we're going to protect the quality. And over, many decades of making their whiskeys, these distilleries became identified with particular profiles. If I taste Laphroaig that doesn't have that medicinal smokiness, I'm like, that's not a Laphroaig, right?
1000%.
If I drink a Macallan and it doesn't have that sulfuric Spanish oak profile, I'm like, that's not a Macallan. So there are very specific things that we identify each Scotch single malt distillery with. When Suntory starts making whiskey about 100 years later, we have a better understanding of the chemistry because 100 years have passed and science has evolved. But B, we have the opportunity to create whatever we want. We don't have this pre-established reputation for making a particular genre. And so what they did was they looked at all of these different stages of production: raw materials, fermentation or saccharification, fermentation, distillation, maturation. And they tried all sorts of different ways of doing it, took copious notes, understood what difference does the different type of malt make? What difference does the time we ferment things for? Is it different if we use brewer's yeast, or is it different if we use distiller's yeast? What shape, what size of pot still? Should it have a bulge or should it be straight necked? And then what types of cask? And what we've discovered is there's not one right way to do things. Actually, there's huge opportunity in creating variety within one distillery. And so there's a word for this. We call it tsukurawaki. Diversity of production, diversity of craftsmanship. So if we think of Yamazaki single malt distillery, there's not one recipe. There's around 200 different recipes we use to make whiskey there. And it's almost as if we imagine the bottle as a representation of the terroir or the flavor of Yamazaki, rather than having a single snapshot of that terroir, it's like we've taken photographs or snapshots from every possible angle. And then the art of the blender is to bring those together to create something that is the best representation and most authentic representation of that flavor.
And you're right. The time of when you started, you almost get to stand on the shoulder of giants and then not get stuck in the same rut that they found themselves stuck in. We
Right.
saw that on the American side forever, where you did it one way, you did it super well that one way, but you did not deviate. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until this most recent boom where you're starting to take techniques from Japanese whiskey, from Scottish whiskey, and we can blend. Blend is not a bad word, or you know what I mean. The
Yeah.
blends in the 70s and 80s were not the same as the blends we're experiencing today. So yeah, 1,000%. So they are creating that 3D model of every way, shape, and form that they can put their whiskey together. And instead of focusing on one path, they're using all of them. And
Yeah.
that's and using that to build a blend of every good part of each experiment that they're having.
Exactly. And so we've
Awesome.
tested all the variables. We've found we don't literally do everything anymore because we found which routes through those variables work the best. But for example, with just raw materials, like we did a huge research piece about what is the best type of malted barley, and we kind of concluded about 5 years ago we do think it's Golden Promise, so that's what we're committing to as our main barley. Then you have, well, what's the best type of peat, and we tried all sorts of different peat. We concluded that specifically Islay sourced peat provides the softness that we're looking for in our smokiness. Fine.
Shocker.
Right. Yeah. Who's surprised by that? But then when we're making our whiskeys, even at Yamazaki, people think Yamazaki is an unpeated whiskey, no smokiness in there. The reality is, actually, at Yamazaki, we do make unpeated. We make also lightly peated whiskey, medium peated whiskey, and heavily peated whiskey. Right. So even if everything else remained the same, you would have 4 different whiskeys at the end of your production, but everything else doesn't remain the same.
Right.
So then we get fermentation. We have 2 different styles. We ferment sometimes in stainless steel, which creates much brighter fruit profiles. And we also sometimes ferment in wooden fermenters. And those give much creamier, much softer notes because of the malolactic reactions that are happening during fermentation. So now you take the multiplier, you've got 4 different varieties, unpeated, lightly, medium, heavily peated, multiplied by 2 different fermentation styles. That gives you 8 different whiskeys. Then, rather than having all kind of identical pot stills, we have 8 completely different pairs. So you use pair number 1, you get one flavor. You use pair number 2, you get a different flavor. So now you take your 8 and multiply it by 8 because you got so the first variable multiplied by the distillation. Now you got 64 potential different whiskeys.
I was
And
an
then
art major.
6
I'm gonna have to
different
take your word on the math.
Dude, yeah, no, don't worry. I'm not going to make you do any difficult maths. And then cask. We have 6 different types of cask we use. So we have like classic barrels that we get from Jim Beam, Maker's Mark, etc. You've got barrels that we reformulate into hogsheads, so slightly different size, slightly larger. You've got puncheons, which are not reused casks. They're brand new American oak in a much larger format. You've got Spanish oak, which is what we call a sherry cask. You've got red wine cask from Bordeaux, and you most importantly perhaps have Mizunara, Japanese oak. And so all of these variables are allowing you to create those different paints on your painter's palette. And so then the final part of what we're focused on is the art of blending. So we then bring those together to create the most complex, but still most Japanese whiskey we can.
I love that because you are literally creating like I keep thinking of a DNA strand where there's just all of these different pieces coming together to create the final product, and you have the best of everything because you're literally creating all the variables that are marching towards your own objective and then picking the best parts of each one to put into the whiskey.
Exactly. And I like to use the metaphor of a garden. So in England, where I grew up, most people's kind of suburban garden is just a grass lawn. Just literally one big grass lawn, and then maybe on the edges there's a few flowers. Think about a Japanese garden, how beautiful, complex, like nuanced and layered the Japanese garden is. For me, that Japanese garden is much more beautiful. And there's something about that idea of curating all of these different elements, but finding a way to bring them into harmony that feels more resonant. It feels like somehow it kind of transmits a deeper truth to us, and it feels more beautiful as a consequence. And that's kind of the Japanese way of making whiskey.
That is absolutely gorgeous, and I follow the balance and the delicate of what you're talking about, because if you go heavy-handed anywhere, you lose the essence of what you're trying to create. So
Yeah.
it needs that touch of instead of slam down by to
Yeah.
create this kind of beautiful, because the Toki that we're sipping on right now, it is so fragrant and there is so much flavor in there without it being so viscous and without it being so heavy.
Yeah.
So it's really, I think that's the appeal, right? That you're able to get a dimension of flavor without a weight, where like we're talking Scottish eggs and haggis are heavy. Like you
Yeah,
even saying them out loud, you picture cold winter, like you said, self-indulgent, that thing that you're trying to comfort food because it's so cold everywhere else. Where here it's light, elegant, but still volumatic in flavor without
exactly.
weighing you down in volume.
Precisely. Yeah, you've nailed it. You've got it in one. And so, I mean, really, this probably a good moment for us to start walking through the three whiskeys and exploring them a bit
Yes,
together if
let's
you're up
do it.
for it. So we've still got the Toki in our glass. This is
I had Toki in my glass. I'm going to put more Toki in my
yeah,
glass.
enjoy it. We make the most of it. It's a lovely sunny afternoon today. So Toki was created and launched about 10 years or so ago now. And this was really created as a celebration of a moment in time. So Toki means time in Japanese, and it was a celebration of the fact that Japanese whiskey for the first time ever was being discovered all over the world. Right, for most of our history, it was only consumed in Japan. About 15 years ago, finally, people start tasting it, and 10 years ago, that momentum becomes what we see now around the world, where you actually can find Japanese whiskey everywhere. And one of the challenges was that meant that a lot of people were unable to find the Japanese whiskeys, although they'd heard of it. And when they did find them, they were often either very, very expensive because of the rarity and the challenge in supply and demand, or they were fake Japanese whiskeys. Because with this popularity, there were a lot of fake Japanese whiskeys being released where they were blended scotch that was labeled as Japanese and bottled in Japan. And so Suntory created Toki to be this celebration of this moment in time, but also to be an opportunity for people to find a first authentic taste of Japanese whiskey that was really made by real Japanese people in Japan. And there's a beautiful phrase, Ichigo Ichie. Have you heard of Ichigo Ichie?
I have not.
So it's the phrase that sits at the heart of the Japanese tea ceremony, but also at the heart of hospitality in Japan. So when I worked out in a bar in Tokyo, this is one of the first things they taught us. And it means one moment, one opportunity. And the heart of that is recognizing that every moment of interaction you have is unique and it's never coming back. So even if you and I met, let's say my bartender, you're my regular guest, and you come to my bar every single day, your day and my day leading to that point was different. So one day you come in, you're feeling lovely and happy. The next day you're feeling stressed. Our context is different, and therefore our moment is always unique, even if I see you every day. And so celebrating Ichigo Ichie is celebrating the specialness of the present. And so we created Toki to kind of capture that essence. And it's a really good example of all these different varieties that we make being brought together. And so blended whiskey, around 50-50 malton grain, which is very unusual. Normally a blended whiskey is mostly grain whiskey, often very neutral grain whiskey, and just a small amount of high intensity malt whiskey. This throws that recipe out the window. They're like, let's make something for this moment. And so you have around half of this is single malt whiskey from Hakushu Distillery, and that's where those green orchard fruit flavors are coming from.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's like the pear, the apple, the kind of herbal notes in there. And this is an amazing spirit because the Hakushu component is kind of the samurai sword that can cut through when you mix it into drinks. It's got the complexity for sipping it, but if you're a first-time whiskey drinker, you may be having a cocktail or a highball, and you need a whiskey that can cut through. You don't see very many Scottish blended cocktails because the whiskeys don't cut through the other flavors you mix them with. And we've purposely used that Hakushu to break through anything else we've mixed with Toki, be that soda or sugar syrup or whatever it might be in your cocktails. The second key element is a grain whiskey from our Cheetah Grain Whiskey Distillery. And we're making three types there. We have clean type, medium type, and heavy type. And the heavy type grain is what we use to make Toki. So it's got lots of kind of caramelized cream, chocolate, and cacao notes in there, and a wonderful kind of silky, oily texture. And the final element is a very small sprinkling around, I don't know what the percentage is, but let's say it's around 1% of the blend or something. I'm making that up. But this is a heavily sherried Yamazaki. So it's kind of a seasoning. Yeah, it gives you grip, it gives you texture, and it gives you complexity. And I love the metaphor that our chief blender uses, which is he calls it the salad seasoning component, because he sees Toki as a bit like a caprese salad. So your freshness is the tomatoes, that's the Hakushu. Your richness and creaminess, that's the heavy grain Cheetah, and that kind of sprinkle of balsamic vinegar on top, that's that heavily sherried Yamazaki.
That is the best explanation of that you could have possibly given, because all of those elements are there, and all of them are there with a, you can tell, with a pronounced reason.
Yeah,
Down to that final, as soon as you were saying yes, because it sits there and it creates that beautiful, almost dry at the finish that holds on to you. But it's
exactly.
not too much. It's just a sprinkle.
That's exactly it. And it's fascinating. I've since moving to the USA, so I've been here about 3.5 years or so now. Unsurprisingly, I'm British. You can probably tell. And back home, people have always been drinking Toki both in cocktails, but also as a sipped whiskey. Whereas here in the USA, there's a much bigger culture around highballs and cocktails, and it's always surprising to people to taste this just neat because they don't realize quite how complex it is. Because you look at the color, it's quite pale. Suntory never uses any coloring in our whiskeys. So any of our whiskeys are natural coloring only. And so you can look at this and go, oh, it must be super young, probably not very complex. And then you taste it, you're like, wait a second, no, this is like at least 10 years old. And it's got this incredible, despite the freshness of it, depth.
Well, it takes you on the full journey, right? Like you get the orchard off the nose. You're getting like uh I get grape skins, a little bit of grapefruit, different notes in, and then that sweetness we were just talking about at the end of it, off of the palate. And then the finish, it's taking you on this like Robusto ride where you're getting everything from a little bit of pepper to a little bit of sugar to a little bit of everything in between as it lands that plane and creates a harmony between the nose and the palate. It's just a beautifully well-rounded whiskey. And I know I normally drink it, I'll drink it in the highball, but on my travels, there are very few places where you go to the middle of nowhere, as comedy will take you from time to time, and especially if you're in another country.
Yeah.
One thing I have found, you're in Bonaire, they've got Toki. You're in freaking middle of Germany, which, I mean, there's spirits from every place you go, but they're probably going to have Toki. So Toki's become like a very consistent whiskey for me to rely on, that I know I like if I'm somewhere that I'm normally not, and
Yeah.
it's always on the shelf.
Exactly. And this is precisely what it's made for. It's made to be that whiskey that is going to give you everything you expect from a Japanese whiskey, but it's something you can find reliably and know that it's really Japanese whiskey. I say there's still this problem even now of fake Japanese whiskeys. We're very lucky that they've just passed this new regulation to define what Japanese. You have regulations for bourbon that hasn't existed ever for Japanese whiskey. It now does, thank goodness, and they've created like a trademark stamp that's going to be added to bottles. But even with that, it's hard for people to know what is a real Japanese whiskey and what is a fake one. And Toki was there to say, okay, we're going to give you one that's everywhere in the world and it's real and it's made by the original producers of Japanese whiskey. So that's really where Toki fitted into our story.
That's beautiful. And what a wonderful starting point for anybody that's making that transition from the bourbon space into the Japanese whiskey space.
Yeah.
This is that beautiful crossover. If you are into the American single malts, and if you're into anywhere that the American space is taking you right now, I
Yeah.
think this is that beautiful hybrid space that'll introduce you, launchpad you into the Japanese whiskey.
Absolutely. And there's another product that we're not tasting today, but doesn't technically exist in the United States. But I've seen it in a few different bars around, and I'm hoping that it will eventually come to the US very soon. There's a product called Cheetah, which is a single grain whiskey, which is around half of what goes into Toki that I mentioned earlier. This is a corn-based whiskey. So this is the closest thing you can get to a bourbon, but made in Japan. And if you're someone that loves those kind of softer profiles, that slight sweetness, if you ever see Cheetah, give that a try because that really is the perfect first step from American whiskey to Japanese.
Oh, I love that. And I was a little spoiled. I know you're in New York right now, right?
Yeah.
We lived there for 15 years in the early 2000s, so we had a ready supply of Japanese whiskey where we could kind of stretch our legs and play in that fountain as much as we wanted to. And then you're right, you would go outside of the city and you would almost be spoiled to what you had available to you there. And then you go as far like Connecticut. You go from New York to Connecticut, the quantity and variety drops like immediately.
Yeah. I mean, we're so lucky in cities like London and New York to get access to things that not everyone
Everything.
does. Very lucky though that thankfully you can find at least the three we're tasting today pretty much everywhere in the United States now. I mean, should we move on to our second whiskey? Would that be a good move?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. Like all over the Southeast, all over the Midwest, West Coast, you can find everything we're drinking today.
Yeah.
If not at every liquor store, every good liquor store, you should be able to go to your Japanese whiskey section and take home one of each of these, if not all three. I think I'm probably going to go all three, but as we've established so far, James, I'm a bit of a fan.
Well, there's 1 or 2 bottles behind you, so I think 3 more won't go amiss. So
Fair.
we're moving on now to the Hibiki, which is probably our most famous whiskey so far. There you are. So we mentioned earlier about that Venn diagram between artistry and kind of scientific or technical skill, and that's really what it means to be a craftsman or an artisan. So these are both blended whiskeys that we've tasted so far, Toki and Hibiki. Their production is the same, their craftsmanship is the same, but the artistic vision is different. It's the same blenders and it's the same distillers, but what are they intending to create? That's the thing that's different. Now, Hibiki was launched quite a lot longer ago than Toki. Hibiki was launched in 1989. And the vision for Hibiki was, for me, I think one of the most beautiful stories I've come across in my whiskey career, which was about re-engaging with the beauty of Japanese culture following a really challenging period in Japanese history. So you have the war. Japan, of course, is not on the correct side of history in that part of in that timeline. And there's a real tough time that follows because for the first time in Japan's history, they get invaded, in this case by the States, and they're going through occupation, and it's a really tough time of really looking deeply at themselves and saying, where did we go wrong? What's happening? And this was tough across many countries that were on the Axis side of things. And many of my closest friends growing up were German. It was really interesting to hear how they confronted their national history. In Japan, they had to face the same thing. But at a certain point around the 70s and 80s, there was this realization that yes, we do need to reconcile with this challenging history, but we can still find beauty and something to celebrate in our culture. And so there was this vision of creating a whiskey that was going to be a celebration of the craftsmanship and beauty of art in Japan. And that's really what Hibiki was. How can we capture the art and craftsmanship of Japan in a glass? And so when you look at the bottle, it's quite different from all the other Suntory bottles. You've got quite traditional looking bottles for our single malts. These look fairly similar shape and size to a Scotch. When we look at Toki, it's a fairly kind of minimalist, quite clean, quite elegant design. But then you look at Hibiki, you've got this really interesting bottle shape. You've got a cork rather than a screw cap. You've got this really interesting texture on the label. And the reason for this is that every single element of the design for Hibiki was supposed to be supporting a different craft in Japan.
Okay.
And so the paper is made by one of Japan's leading artists, and she is a washi paper artist. What that means is like creating paper is an art form. It's not like, a random thing you stick in a printer. It's something that itself has artistic value. And so all of our different Hibiki labels, as you look through the range, have a different design that's kind of intended to capture something about the flavor of that spirit. There's also the 24-sided bottle. These 24 sides are supposed to represent the 24 micro seasons in Japan, but also the 24 hours of the day and how those come into harmony. There's the calligraphy in the logo. We worked with Japan's most prestigious calligrapher to create a kind of artistic representation of the word Hibiki that captured the sense of harmony. And so everything about this whiskey is about celebrating the crafts and the arts of Japan, but also celebrating that tradition of wa, that's tradition of harmony in Japanese culture. So when you taste this, it should really be the most harmonious blended whiskey you've ever tasted. That's the vision.
Well, I love it right off the nose. Like once you really open it up, like there's that beautiful, I get like a hint of citrus and that sandalwood is just like and this what there is some Mizunara in this, right? Like it's been because it's right off the nose, you can tell that it's got some of that going on, and that is just so inviting. And I think for the American palate too, we have romanticized that wood specifically, and like our favorite right now. It's having a moment in the States where it's hard to get, and if you get a bourbon that's been finished in that, then it just, people are clamoring for it. So the
Yeah.
fact that this is straight from the source, it's just like it stands out in the nose.
100%. And this was actually the first whiskey that Suntory made that highlighted Mizunara as the center of the flavor profile. Because again, the brief here is to represent Japan. This is supposed to be the ultimate brand ambassador for Japan. That's really the best way of thinking about the vision for Hibiki some 40 years ago.
Love that.
And if you're going to make a whiskey that represents your culture, of course it has to be the best quality. That's standard number one, but it also has to capture the flavors of your culture. And we know we can make delicate and refined whiskeys, but we had this type of oak that we discovered. We were the first producer ever to work with Mizunara back in the 1940s. And we've put decades of research into how do we get the best out of this oak. And we found that it actually isn't possible to make good complex whiskeys younger than 15 years old with Mizunara. It takes at least 15 years to extract the good complex nuances of it. Before that, it tastes kind of astringent. It tastes a little bit almost plasticky in terms of its profile. But after 15 years, that's when it begins to really harmonize into that incense profile that we all know and love. And so we took those old 15-year plus, actually in the case of Hibiki, it was 17 years plus Mizunara casks, and we blended them with these other casks that we use at Yamazaki, American oak, Spanish oak, etc., and created that rounded profile that we associate with Hibiki.
And the Mizunara, it takes longer because the wood is tighter, right? Like when you've got a barrel of Mizunara, am I right? I might be wrong. I don't know. I'm not the expert here.
There's a whole host of reasons, and it gets fairly technical. So there's this chemical structure called tyloses, which affects basically it's the way in which the kind of vessels inside the oak interact with the whiskey, and like there's a lot of challenges. Firstly, this oak takes a lot longer to mature in the first place. It's very carefully controlled, so even if you own the tree, you can't just go and chop it down. There's a whole process there. It's very, very difficult to cooper, to turn into casks. It's incredibly hard, and again, that hardness makes it challenging to interact with the whiskey once it's in there. It also has a tendency to crack and to leak, so it becomes very expensive because there's wastage. There's all sorts of reasons that Mizunara is difficult. But if you have the patience to wait for 15 to 25 years, not just the kind of oily profiles extracted that happen in the early stage, but also those spice profiles are extracted. And as I say, it does take 15 years before you can get that true Mizunara flavor out. So when we see Mizunara finishes at Suntory, we kind of respectfully enjoy tasting them, but it doesn't capture the flavor of Mizunara for us.
Oh, that's interesting. And of course, like anything when you're finishing, I think they're only going for that hint, right? Like you're not going to capture the full breath of the Mizunara by finishing. They're
Yeah.
just like with any good finish, though, they're just looking for the thing to heighten what's already there, and they're hoping for a hint of that viscous, oily. They're hoping some of that creeps through to kind of give it a stamp of
Yeah.
Mizunara approval, versus, of course, being able to call it a full Mizunara whiskey.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, not least because these casks are so expensive. This is roughly
Right.
50 to 100 times more expensive as an oak than bourbon barrels. So very, very difficult for producers to source it in the first place because of the rarity, but then also just afford it. So I understand why many, many producers are opting for finishing, because it gives them a more affordable way to engage with this type of oak. But we're super lucky. Like we kind of first discovered this oak decades ago, and we're very lucky to have good supplies of it. But there's a final thing to say on oak that I think you'll find interesting that many people don't realize. So Suntory doesn't do finishing for Japanese whiskies. We do with some of our Scotch distilleries, but there's a long-held belief at the House of Suntory that where you create those nuances of, is it like a touch? You just mentioned like adding a touch of a flavor versus overpowering things. That decision is made in the art of blending. but we want to be blending with the most complex and high quality whiskeys we can. But there's a word for that too. It's called tsukurakomi. And so we do full maturation in particular oaks and then create the nuance through blending. So our if we say American oak, it's 100% aged in American oak. If we say Spanish oak, it's 100% aged in Spanish oak. Same for Mizunara. There's no starting in the cheaper cask and then finishing it in the more expensive cask, because we want to extract the true story of that cask. I like to use the metaphor of dating. Like, if I'm unfortunate to be single at the moment. If I go on a first date, I get a sense of someone's personality. I get a sense of their sense of humor, their interests. Do we get along? Do we want to see each other again? But I don't know that person. Right? Not really. I certainly can't fall in love with that person after one date because we haven't understood each other fully at this stage. But you contrast that with, a relationship 5-10 years in. I've been lucky to be in those relationships, and you've seen each other's all sides of each other, right? You've seen each
Ups
other
and downs.
happy, sad, angry, frustrated, being pleasant and being desperately unpleasant. And you, through all of that, truly begun to understand one another. And that's where love grows from, because that true depth of understanding allows you to fully open to each other. And we kind of have the same perspective on casks, right? Like, if you age a cask for just a brief moment, you get a suggestion of what it's about, but you don't really capture its essence. Where over time, you get the bitter parts of the cask, you get the tannic parts of the cask, but it's all harmonized with the wonderful complexities within the oak. And so that's our approach. We do full maturation, take it out, and then blend it.
Similar to some methods in Canadian whiskey, where they won't have a mash bill per se. They'll just have 100% this, 100% this, 100% this, blend it to where they want it to go. And the beauty of all of those techniques is that it creates different profiles, and all of them are what you want at any given time on any given day. It's I'm not going to butcher it. I've already butchered Mizunara a couple times. Ichi, say that
Ichigo Ichi.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you say it because I'm gonna butcher it again. But that's the if there was a principle that we preach at the Bourbon Showdown, it would be exactly that. Everything of every part of your day, no matter what part of it you're in, is what's led you to what you're thinking about the spirit that you're sipping at that moment. And that is the beauty of never having judgment against one spirit or another, because if you didn't like it today, you might love it tomorrow. If you loved it today, tomorrow might be different. It's just being present in that moment of what you're drinking and experiencing it to the fullest possible way you can, and being true to honest to that, to yourself,
Yeah. And that's exactly it. And there's a really lovely metaphor actually about how we think about Hibiki's flavor that's really resonant with that. So for me, one of the most kind of fleeting moments to enjoy is when you enjoy nature. So we've all heard of like how famous the cherry blossom Hanami festival is in Japan, right? Because those flowers that come, they go. I was very lucky to grow up in this amazing family where my grandmother had this beautiful garden with flowers growing all time of the year, but they would be coming and going, right? Like, I'd go to the garden one day and there'd be flower A. I'd come back 2 weeks later, that's gone, but now there's flower B. And so we like to use the metaphor of flowers to explain the flavor of Hibiki. So not the fact that it's necessarily floral in terms of, it does have some floral notes, but that's not why, but more how the flavors unfold. So we say elegantly blossoming to describe the flavor. And if you picture a peony flower, right, that's that really round flower that you've probably seen before. At first glance, when you buy your peonies, it's like one fairly solid thing. But then as it begins to open up, you see petal after petal unfold. And that's really how we experience the flavor of Hibiki. You take that first nose, that first sip, it presents that kind of very soft, mellow, rounded, refined flavor, but it's kind of one flavor. But as you go back sip after sip, it's like you're discovering petal after petal. Your second sip is often the Mizunara. Your third sip, you start to notice some of the natural fruitiness. Then your fourth sip, maybe the oaky profiles. Then eventually, maybe some of the darker fruits, some of the Spanish oak sherry casks we're using. And so that's kind of a really great way of understanding how we blend Hibiki, is that kind of blossoming idea. The other one that I love, have you ever had a glass of whiskey over a hand-carved ball of ice?
Over a hand-carved bowl of ice?
Yeah, like a perfect sphere that someone's chipped away at.
Oh, yes, like ice cube in your drink. Yes, of course.
Yeah, but a spherical ball. Yeah.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Of course.
So I was lucky. I used to work in a bar called High Five out in Tokyo, and a big part of my job, I wasn't allowed to make cocktails. This is even though I'd been a bartender for 10 years at this stage, you have to have a certain degree of qualification through your apprenticeship. But what I was allowed to do was carve balls of ice for our guests. And I would carve dozens of these. And we use for Hibiki the ice ball as a great metaphor for the blending. So if you picture a blender, he's got all these different whiskeys to choose from, and takes a glass, pours some of the whiskey in there, and he has to analyze it to understand, where does this fit into my blend? We often use what's known as a flavor compass. So maybe at the north, you've got spice, east might be fruit, south might be peat, whatever. Okay. But there's more than just four. There's all these different points. And we create a map of the analysis. Now, a spiky map for us isn't fully harmonious, right? Because things are spiking out too much. It's too smoky, or it's too fruity, or too whatever. So the objective with the Hibiki is to blend those whiskeys such that the flavor map becomes perfectly round, just like carving an ice ball, right? You're looking for, where are the sharp edges? How can I take away that sharp edge? How can I soften it to create this perfect sphere of rounded, complex flavor?
Well, and it's got that plus the dimension of, like you were just saying, the petals each opening up with each sip that you take. Like it
Yeah.
takes you on a full yeah, stick with journey. Like beginning, middle, end of this pour takes you on light, heavy, dark. Like you get a little bit of everything. And to your point, none of it's jagged. All of it is in harmony up with the actual whiskey itself. Like it's a very, and this is one I think you could sit with, like if the Toki is your day sit, like if that's the one that, like, hot day, pour it, put it on a cube, sit outside, enjoy. I think
Yeah.
this is the one you could sit with for a while and just sort of enjoy and let it unpack
Yeah.
and break it apart and really geek out over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've loved playing games with my friends where we'll be having an evening drinking Hibiki, and once an hour, I'll ask them to write down a tasting note, and it's
Oh, I love
amazing to
that.
see how it evolves over time.
Oh, I love that. I'm
Yeah, it's a great
stealing
fun
that.
game to play with people, because also people, as they drink a little bit more, they lose their kind of fear of saying what they're actually thinking, and
Yep.
people begin to open up a little bit more. It's a fun little game to play.
Oh, I love
Um,
that, man. I'm totally stealing that because you're right. The inhibition goes away with more sips, and then all of a sudden, but there's also a beautiful excitement that comes along with that,
yeah,
because as people, if you don't shut them down and you let them know that whatever they're tasting's right,
yeah,
then they'll open up more, and the next thing you know, they're excited about it, and then after that, they're like, "And I'm getting grapefruit, and I'm getting," and you're like, "Yes, that is the excitement that you should have when you're trying a new spirit, because it's something new. It's something that's your palate has never experienced. So lean into that. It's not a
exactly.
bad thing."
Exactly. Like, this is why we have spirits, is that it's not just about drinking, it's about enjoying flavor, and having those moments of discovering flavor together.
100%, man.
One of the coolest things, have you come across the phrase flavor is imaginary?
No, but I love that sentiment immediately.
It's a fun one, because it is. Flavor doesn't exist. You can't point to the flavor molecule. You can point to an aroma molecule, but you can't point to a flavor molecule. Flavor is what your brain does. It's a creation of your mind when it brings together three different data inputs, right? So what's happening in your mind, your brain, your consciousness is, I'm receiving taste data: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, metallic, etc. I'm also receiving aromatic data. And I'm trying to combine those to understand, is this dangerous? Is this safe? Is this good for me? Is it whatever, right? From an evolutionary perspective. Now, the third data stream that it uses to validate that question is memory. So I'm
Okay.
taking taste and I'm taking aroma data, and I'm comparing that combination with my memory and asking myself, does this remind me of something that can then give me a suggestion of, how is this going to be? So when I say it tastes like apple, or it tastes like cherry blossom, or it tastes like jack, whatever, it doesn't actually taste like that. It's just the thing that my mind is bringing to the forefront as the kind of test. So I'm like, oh, it's this aroma, this taste that reminds me of this thing, right? And then that's why Ichigo Ichie, we all get so excited when I say, oh, it tastes like sandalwood, and you go, oh my god, it does taste, because we're realizing that there is a human connection there. Our
That's right. That's right.
memory is the same, and our experience is a validation also of what it is to be human, that we are experiencing the same thing, and that's what I think makes tasting together so magical.
100%. That spirit of community, where you and I and whoever else can just all come together and be like, yes, that's exactly what that is. And
Yeah,
for a moment, you're not really thinking of anything else other than that.
exactly, exactly.
That's beautiful, man. I love that.
I think this is the moment to move on to our final dram of the day. It feels like a moment of connection, and where better to go than a single malt whiskey when you're connecting with someone.
Oh, I'm right there with you, buddy.
So this is Yamazaki 12 years old. Um,
Oh,
this is one of the most special whiskeys for me, just personally in the world, because my first discovery of whiskey came down to Yamazaki single malt. So
okay.
I shan't say what age because it wouldn't be legal in the United States, and in fact may also not be where I'm from. But I was working as a kind of young teenager in a local pub to earn some money. Very, very lucky that this pub had an incredible whiskey selection because the landlord just loved his whiskeys. And I really wanted to learn to like whiskey because my dad liked whiskey. Now, my dad and I at this age did not have a great relationship, but I had nonetheless a huge amount of reverence and respect. He was my dad nonetheless. And I was like, all right, well, he likes whiskey. I want to learn to like whiskey because that's me growing up and being, my adult self. And so the deal I did with the landlord was like, if I can sell a glass of that whiskey, I can take a tiny bit and have a taste myself. And so I was going around like trying all these different whiskeys, and I didn't like any of them. I started with what my dad liked, which was he's a huge Jack Daniels fan. So tried that. Nope, not for me. Tried a bunch of others. Didn't like, I'm sorry to say, I didn't like any of the American stuff. Didn't like any of the Scotch stuff. There were a couple of Irish that was like, less bad maybe. And then I tasted the Yamazaki, and it was the first. I had ignored it because I thought it was like weird foreign Asian whiskey. And I was just 20, gosh, almost exactly 20 years ago now. So I was very, very young at the time. I'd kind of ignored it, but I didn't like anything else. Fine, let's try this. Let's see what it's like. And I tasted that Yamazaki single malt, and I was like, oh, that one I actually like. And that was the kind of door cracking open for me in the world of whiskey. And so it's genuinely like when I got offered the job by Suntory about 8 years ago, it was like a kind of coming home moment, which was lovely.
Well, right off the bat, the nose of this is incredibly inviting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Again, region comes into it. Now I wanted to put everything through the what are you actually getting filter. You know what I mean? What part of the brain is actually telling you what you're getting? Because I'm in the South right now. I've been here for a few years,
Mhm.
and I'm getting a hint of peach
Yeah.
off of the nose.
Peach is literally the correct tasting note from the website.
Well, okay, there you go.
Bish bash bosh.
But you know what I mean? Like I immediately from that last conversation, I thought I was again, this is the beauty of whiskey because I've been doing this a while. I still have self-doubt. There's a handful of things we've talked about in this conversation where I'm like, okay, I don't know as much as he does. Stay quiet, let him talk. But that's the beauty of it because when we got to that right there, my immediate thought wasn't I get peach. My thought was peach might not be correct. What have we had recently that has peach on your mind? You know what I mean?
Interesting. Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
yeah.
connection where we're all still getting through this thing. None of us are ever going to be, well, there's a couple of us that are master emerituses, but more than likely, I'm never going to be a master emeritus. So you still learn every day. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And at the end of the day, even those people that are master emeritus, like they're still just going with their own guesses and their own judgments. One thing I love about what you've just said is I think so many people, as we mentioned earlier, are scared to say honestly what they feel. And I bet I'm speaking on behalf of your audience right now. Like, thank you for showing that even you can feel that feeling of nervousness. And so do I. Like when I'm with Shinji, our chief blender, I'm so nervous to volunteer tasting notes. And like I sometimes have to write the tasting notes for our products. Like part of my job, we create a new product. What's the website going to say? And I have to submit this to Shinji. Like, is this right? And he's like, oh yeah, you're good. But it's so scary every time.
Well, but that's the beauty. That's why I wanted to have you on today because as everyone starts their own Japanese whiskey journey, they're
Hmm.
going to have that hesitation of, am I doing this right? It's just human to
Yeah,
not be sure of something you've never had or never done or whatever, however you want to put it. And hopefully they'll listen to us, they'll watch tidbits of this today and be like, "Oh, yeah, okay. whatever I taste is me. Whatever I smell is right. There's nothing wrong. We're all going to just have a good time with good spirits. This whiskey makes me philosophical. Let's
Good.
just put that out there because, like, the past 10 minutes, I'm like, now let me tell you how I'm feeling.
Man, philosophy is just the expression of emotions and memories, but done through fancy words, you know? So that's the important thing, is sharing how you feel. I
Dude,
think this one,
it's been fantastic. I can tell you that much.
I mean, I'm a philosopher. I'm literally writing a book about Japanese philosophy, so we can talk philosophy anytime you want.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I can tell just from talking to you the passion that you bring for this. It really resonates. Like it just you exude the passion for Japanese whiskey.
Thank you, man. I mean, I've been so lucky with my career. I often use the metaphor of surfing. I was, as you can probably tell, with this silly, admittedly balding but blonde, silly hair that I have, that I grew up surfing. And I use the metaphor of when I started in Japanese whiskey, I was like one of those beginner surfers on the world's tiniest wave, just kind of standing up. And what's fascinating is I've managed to stay on the surfboard as this wave has just grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. And I'm just trying to stay on my board.
I love that, man. I love that. Uh, since you started the metaphor, we were talking about surfing before we got started today. I think there's also a parallel between the stillness before the wave comes to the
Mhm.
whiskey, and how when you're out there, one of the best parts is waiting for the wave and just being in touch with every part of your surroundings before the wave hits you.
Yeah,
And I think that's the sensory of the whiskey experience, like
yeah.
just being present in the sensory as it washes over you, and you get to really be a part of what you're tasting.
Totally, and it's I've never actually thought of it in this way before, but you've kind of stimulated something for me where when I experience that moment in surfing, you kind of sense the wave is there and it's coming, and you're just about to be like, it's kind of a slingshot experience. You're about to be fired forward on your body. You know it's about to happen, and then it happens. And but because you know it, you kind of prepared for it. I think that is a really nice metaphor for explaining how the flavors present themselves with a great Japanese whiskey, because so often, I mean, I'm a whiskey fan across the board. Doesn't matter if it's Scotch, bourbon, whatever. But one of my challenges that I occasionally face with cask strength bourbons, as someone that's not grown up in this country, is the first thing I get hit with is just a punch of alcohol. And then this amazing wave of flavor comes after it. But even after 20 years of drinking a lot of whiskey, that first hit of alcohol is still a bit of a shock to my system, right? And I have to just be like, cross your fingers, James, don't worry. The flavor's on its way, right? Like, get through this pain and then the flavor's coming. With the Japanese whiskey, it's a slightly different approach. And it's not a criticism of bourbon, just a different way of doing things, is that you don't get any alcohol hit on the first. You get this kind of weird, oh, there's, and then all the flavor evolves. And that's just something I absolutely adore.
Well,
Um, go on.
what, like you're saying, in how they've put it together as well, that delicate nature. Let's hazmat versus, say, this 12-year. There's a beautiful jumping off point to this 12-year where
Mhm.
you are it's like a roller coaster, right? Like
Yeah.
it's drawing you in with some of those herbal notes, with some of those wonderful sugars that are kind of drawing out the saliva and just making it more like your palate's looking forward to it even after you've already started drinking it, and then boom, there is like a three-dimensional flavor that just hits you.
Yeah.
Whereas the hazmat, it's like the reverse of that. Instead of it being a delicate start, it is more of an abrasive start. And then, but it's like priming your palate in two different ways.
Mhm.
One is getting you ready for something tumultuous, and the other is getting you ready for something a little more cohesive. It's
Mhm.
all in how the palate's prepping you for what's about to happen.
Yeah. No,
Because the
that's a really
flavor's
good way of
still
putting
there,
it.
to your point. It's just a matter of how's it starting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that kind of soft, kind of almost zen moment, and then it swells. And that's just like that piece before the wave hits you, like, okay, off we go. So yeah, super exciting. So this one is as I say, a single malt. We've tried two blends already. This is just single malt whiskey. So single malt following the Scottish definition, i.e., made in one distillery, right? So this was Japan's first ever distillery, opened in 1923. We use 3 different cask varieties, or rather oak varieties, to make this whiskey. American oak, Spanish oak, which is often known as a sherry cask, and then lastly, Mizunara, the Japanese oak. So this has the same varieties of oak that we tasted in the Hibiki, but only using Yamazaki, whereas Hibiki is mostly Yamazaki, but also contains other whiskeys from Chita and Hakushu. What's really interesting, we're not tasting the full range today because we would be a little tipsy if we tried all of them. But there's not, it's not as simple as to say that you've got just different ages of the same liquid. So we have Yamazaki Distiller's Reserve, which is a non-age statement whiskey, but let's call it like around 10-ish years old. You've got the 12, 18, and 25. That's your core range. And then there's a few occasionally very special Yamazaki 55, whatever. What's interesting is, as I say, we do full maturation and then blending. And so the process for making a single malt for us is asking, at this age, what is the best cask? And then once we've understood that, that becomes the heart. And then how do we use everything else to bring complexity and depth to that core flavor? So the Distiller's Reserve, the non-age statement, focuses on red wine casks. The 12-year-old focuses on ex-bourbon or American oak casks. The 18 focuses on Spanish or sherry casks. And lastly, the 25 focuses on Mizunara. Because at these ages, that's the best cask to use. That's expressing the most complex flavors. But that we take that, with this case, the 12-year-old, we take that American oak, and then we layer on the Spanish oak and the Mizunara to get that perfect balance and complexity.
I love that, though, because that is a language that makes sense to me in terms of the 12-year. It's been in that new American oak long enough that it's gotten through the fruit stage, but it's not letting the oak completely take over yet at 12. And then for that Spanish cask, you're hitting you're breaking the oak with the sugars from that sherry. And I just that's my language. That's an age language that I completely understand right there in terms of the logic behind why you're doing what you do.
Exactly. Because of course, like if you have a whiskey before it's ready or after it's ready, it's not right. And that's going to change depending on the type of cask you're using. There's a really good moment here to talk about, like, and we go back, I guess we started this conversation with the history of Japanese whiskey, but also the production of Japanese whiskey. And I mentioned from the off that we haven't stayed the same. We've learned the Scottish style, but we've tried to refine whiskey making. There's this word kaizen in Japanese culture, means continuous improvement. And so Yamazaki 12 is for me the best example of that, because we opened the distillery over 100 years ago. We first released a single malt in 1984. So Yamazaki single malt first came out in 1984. It was pretty good. I've been very privileged to taste some Yamazaki single malt from the 1980s. I actually took my team of brand ambassadors to Japan in February, and we tried a 1980s bottling, a 2000s bottling, and a current bottling of Yamazaki 12, and they tasted completely different. And there was a central thread, but they completely changed. And my background in whiskey from Scotland taught me that older bottles generally were better. So my dad has a wonderful bottle of Macallan 12 in his cabinet that he inherited from his father, and this is like a 1980s bottling, and it's, to my palate, far better than contemporary bottlings of the Macallan 12. And I assumed the same was going to be true of Yamazaki, to be honest. Like, I assumed the old ones were going to be better than the new ones, because I just have this general presumption that things get worse over time. It turns out the opposite is true. So we released in 1984, the first ever single malt Yamazaki. 1988-89, they decided to close the distillery and completely rebuild it because they think they could make the quality of the production better. And they changed the fermentation techniques. They introduced direct firing to the pot stills, they make smaller pot stills also. All sorts of research over 30 years goes into how do we make this distillery better. You fast forward 12 years after the distillery reopens, and the same exact product comes out year after year, but 12 years after the renovation, they release the same whiskey, and it wins the first ever gold medal in Japanese whiskey history.
So whatever they refined,
Whatever they
really,
did, paid off 12 years later.
Wow.
Then, around the same time, 5 or 6 years later, they again renovate the distillery. They improve the production processes. They change the equipment. Fast forward again another 12 years, you come to 2024. First ever Supreme Champion Spirit for Japanese whiskey.
See, I love that. The For American whiskey to have that happen, there needs to be a fire. Like, you rarely see break it down and build it back just for the sake of progress.
Yeah.
Now I'm not. There are a lot of companies right now that are doing exactly that and investing heavily into the progress and the new methods and higher tech distillation process. But historically, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's that is not as sophisticated as Ichi. Uh,
Ichikuichie.
I still can't say it,
That's fine. Don't worry.
but it's that say that sums it up pretty good.
100%, man. I mean, the Japanese version is like, it's not so much about fixing things. It's that just keep evolving. Again,
Refine, right?
we're not looking to our inspiration in the kind of Western sense. Our inspiration is nature. And what is nature doing? It's
Ever
evolving.
changing.
Yeah. It's
That's right.
constantly becoming something new.
I
And so,
love it,
yeah, I
man.
mean, that for me is Japanese whiskey at its core, really. I mean, and it continues even to this day. So the amount of effort that goes into research and refinement, it blows my mind. Every time I visit our distilleries and I talk to our team there, they're telling me new amazing things. Like, so one of my favorite ones that they've done, that in fact, I'm going to give you two of my favorites they've done recently. The first is to do with the firing of the pot stills. Like, of course, one of the great challenges of whiskey making is it's not always super efficient for the environment, right? And we strongly believe that you need to have direct firing of your wash stills. But the challenge with that is you have to use natural gas. Our whole thing at the House of Suntory is harmony with nature. How can we balance those two features? Well, harmony with nature for us goes back decades. This is not like a greenwashing thing that many other producers might do. Suntory has had a forest management scheme to regrow the forests of Japan for literally decades now. The quality of water in Japan has literally improved because Suntory invests into the forest sustainability. But that's one side of things. How do we make sure that our natural gas stay good? Well, what they did was they started a research project with Tokyo University and Heriot-Watt University, and they invented the first ever pot stills that were fired by hydrogen fuel cells. So we take the water out of our spring, we use solar panels to get electricity, we combine those, you get a hydrogen fuel cell that costs nothing for the environment. The only downside is water. So the only, like, not downside, the only waste product is water. You now have a hydrogen fuel cell that can power your pot stills.
That's wild, man.
Right? It's just, and that's not going to affect the flavor. That's literally just affecting the kind of engagement with nature. But the flavors still care, of course they still care about the flavor. How can we improve the flavor? Well, we think we've done everything we can on distillation. Maybe there's more, but we could improve fermentation. We see what's going on in natural wine. All right, we're going to start growing our yeast on the trees in the forest. And so if you look 10 years into the future, all of your Hakushu whiskeys will be made with yeast that was literally grown in the forest of the distillery.
Oh, wow.
And it's just ever present, this idea of looking at what you're doing, asking yourself, how can it be better? And one thing I also love is it's not just asking ourselves. There's this word gemba. It means being on the ground. It means getting real insights. When our blenders are looking for how we improve our whiskeys, we don't talk amongst ourselves that much. Last year, I went on a wonderful tour with our chief blender, and we visited a bunch of countries. And the main thing he wanted to do was invite bartenders for a coffee and a dinner and ask them what's wrong with our whiskey.
So important. I mean, that R&D is invaluable when it comes to actual feedback you can use to grow a brand stronger. If you're not listening to the people, it becomes very siloed, and it's easy to just turn into a well of agreement.
Yeah.
Where I think we're fine. Yeah, we're fine, and then no growth, nothing changes. Man, it sounds like you guys are doing everything just a combination of efficiently and artistically in terms of putting whiskey together for a flavor profile, but doing it as efficiently as possible to make sure that it is properly thought through and executed to attain the artistic vision that you set out to do. It's beautiful, beautiful whiskey, James. It really is.
Thank you. I say thank you. I have no credit to claim for this. This is our blenders, our distillers, and ultimately the vision from the family. Like I've always been a kind of rebel, as it were. That's probably one of the reasons I became a bartender. Is like there's something about modern capitalism that bothers me, and I was nervous of working for a big company because Suntory is now it's a big company, and I'd always either own my own companies or work for small independents. And the Suntory family are remarkable because they really see this as a responsibility more than a business. You know, there's a sense of honor around. We created this category. We're the first people to make Japanese whiskey. We remain by quite a big margin the biggest producer of Japanese whiskey. We're not worried about money. Actually, we don't have shareholders. We are privately owned. They're already billionaires. Let's focus on A, making the best quality stuff we can, B, representing the culture authentically and with honor, and C, continuing to improve things so that the next generation continues to enjoy great whiskey. Like they literally allow our chief blender and chief distillers to consult for other Japanese whiskey producers for free, just to help the category.
Make it as strong as it can be, and everybody succeeds.
Yeah, with the rising tide, all ships sail better.
That's right. That's right. Well, James, this has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. I appreciate the insights that you bring. If there was a closing remark that you could make to a consumer that is looking to try Japanese whiskey for the first time, what would that tie be that brings all of this together? You're at the whiskey, you're at the liquor store, and you're thinking, I want to try Japanese whiskey. What would you tell that consumer?
That's a wonderful question. I think I would say that ultimately, whether it's about Japan itself, Japan's culture, or Japan's whiskey, the key word is harmony. And harmony is not just about a sense of flavor, but it's about harmony between you and the whiskey in that moment. And when you taste a great Japanese whiskey, you feel that harmony in your heart. It's a sense of connection. It's a sense of it's you're feeling something in the same way you feel with great art. If you listen to a great piece of music, see a great movie, or see a great painting, it resonates with you. And a great Japanese whiskey does the same thing. So find your path, enjoy it your way, and hopefully you have a chance to share a dram someday in person.
Man, that is beautiful sentiment, and I hope so. We've got a lot of the same friends. I'm literally texting Tim as soon as we get off of this call and letting him know what a fantastic time I've had today talking Japanese whiskey with you. James, the House of Suntory, some phenomenal whiskeys. The next time you're at your local liquor store, stop by any of these, all three, one or the other. You can't make a bad decision because all of them are going to take you on a different whiskey adventure. James, come back and see me again, buddy. This has been a lot of fun. I'm in New York all the time. We'll grab a pour south of Houston, and we'll have a damn good time.
That sounds amazing, man. Well, thank you so much for hosting me today. It's been a pleasure. And I'll see you soon in New York, hopefully.
Cheers.
Kanpai. Thank you.